just glancing over. I'm just glancing over at the chat, and as always, we have great representation from all over the place. I feel like we have two people from really far away, one from Vancouver, that's Heidi, and then we also have someone here today from Dublin, Ireland. Just lost that in the chat. Where was that one? Yes. Sinan, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, but greetings back to Dublin, Ireland. And welcome everyone to today's webinar. If you're here today, it's because you're interested in learning a little bit more about the new milestones and culminating tasks that were developed a couple of years ago and are gradually being released. My name is Barb Glass, and I'm here today with my co-presenter, Robin Cook-Ritchie. I'll let Robin introduce herself in a moment. My role currently is the Executive Director of the College Sector Committee for Adult Upgrading here in Ontario. And so I'm here in that capacity today as one of the Pop-Up PD presenters and also as a member of the Pop-Up PD committee. And we work together, of course, each year to produce a variety of different webinars that are of interest to our literacy and basic skills field in Ontario. Robin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Barb. Welcome, everybody. And it's great. We have a great turnout today, which is nice to see. I'm Robin Ritchie. I am the Executive Director of Lauback Literacy Ontario. And I also manage a school board service delivery agency, an LBS program at a school board. So I kind of have my feet in both of those places. And I hope that you enjoy today's session. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. And I see Stacy has also placed in the chat the link to where today's recording will be posted and also where you can access other previous years of Pop-Up PD sessions if you're interested in looking at looking at what's available and listening to the recordings or just accessing the PowerPoint presentations. I also would like to welcome our interpreters, Carolyn and Becky, who are here today to support our colleagues in American Sign Language interpretation. So thank you, Carolyn and Becky. Just looking back at the chat, was there a pop-up survey shared for professional development for literacy educators? Julie, I'm not sure what kind of survey you're referring to. Like a survey for topics? Potential topics? Can you clarify that in the chat a bit? And I'll keep an eye on that and come back to it. Usually, oh, there you go. Just shut up. Yeah. Okay, so the evaluation survey maybe is what you were talking about, Julie. So yes, we do have the evaluation survey at the end of the webinar will pop up on your browser automatically. And Stacy will also place the link in the chat to the evaluation survey. We really appreciate getting your feedback if you have a moment or two to take. It's very quick. It's just a few multiple choice questions. There we go. Oh, so Stacy, that looks like it's the webinar 1 that popped up here.
Yeah, I'm not sure why anything popped up at all yet. Julie, I don't know if you left the session and then came back. Maybe that popped up. There's no link in the survey section, so nothing should be popping up, but I'm looking into it right now and I'll paste the proper link in the chat in just a minute.
Stacy, this is Robin, and I just want to let you know the same thing happened to me when I opened Zoom today. I just closed it. So I thought it was just some kind of weird glitchy thing. So it looks like it happened to a lot of people.
Yeah, me too.
Just so you're aware.
I'll check it out.
Okay, thank you. So we'll hold the phone a little bit on the evaluation survey, but Stacy will get the correct link posted in the chat for us that references today's webinar. And I would just add, similar to what Robin mentioned when she introduced herself, Robin is both a support org ED and a service delivery manager. I also manage the ACE Distance e-channel program, which is one of the LBS e-channel providers. And so it is, I think it's nice for Robin and I, because we both do still act as service delivery managers for LBS programming, and that helps us to maybe continue to relate to some of the challenges or questions that you have as you proceed through your delivery of LBS. We would like to start today with a land acknowledgement recognition, as we normally do. And even though we're meeting virtually today, we do want to recognize and respect and acknowledge the importance of all the different lands we are occupying across the province and the country today. We would like to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to ways that we can improve our relationship between nations and our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. And we want to remind ourselves that no matter where we are here in Canada, we are living on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people. Very briefly, quickly, especially if this is your first time attending a pop-up PD session, it is a free webinar series developed by a group of our regional LBS network EDs and some of us representing the provincial support organizations. And we have a variety of topics for which we create and present webinars each year. And this has been going on for some time, since about the year 2015-16 year was the first year we started pop-up PD. Back then it was called Online Community of Practice. That was the original name. And as Stacy put the link in the chat earlier, there is a place where we post all of the resources and presentations and recordings for all of the pop-up PD sessions that we've had over the years. If you have an idea for a webinar topic for future, feel free to send an email to echannel@contactnorth.ca, as you can see on the screen, and we always welcome suggestions for future webinars. We aim for 4 to 6 per year, and the last several years we've been pretty much doing 6. So in today's session, we will have 4 main topic areas, and just bear with me because I'll be looking back and forth between my screens a bit, and probably Robin will also as she's presenting. She and I will go back and forth a couple of times during the presentation and share the presentation slides with you that way. If you have questions or comments, feel free to put them in the chat. We generally do try to follow along with the chat as well. And between the two of us, we can hopefully address questions as we go along. Last year and the year before, we did a similar webinar. And part of the reason that we did those previous ones is you know, we were expecting perhaps that the milestones and the culminating tasks would have been made available a little more quickly, but it has taken some time for the ministry to work out the French-English translation and so on, and for them to be collected and posted. So if you did attend one of those previous webinars that Robin and I did in the last 2 years, there'll be a little bit of overlap in some of the general information that you see about milestones and culminating tasks. But in this one, we are finally able to actually show you some of the titles of the new milestones and the new culminating tasks. Of course, we can't really look at them together as a group because there are too many, and because they're multi-page documents, but at least today you can see a little bit more specifically about what's been developed and some of the changes and revisions that have been made to the original milestones and culminating tasks. So just a brief overview of the timeline in terms of the development of the milestones and culminating tasks. They actually were originally developed, as some of you might remember, back in 2011, and there were 60 milestones and 6 culminating tasks originally. 2014, 22 of the milestones were adapted, and Robin will talk a little bit more about the adaptation process later. And 12 new culminating tasks were added at that time. The original 6 had 1 for each of the 5 goal paths and 1 under skills training within the apprenticeship goal path. In 2014, 2 new culminating tasks were added to each of the goal paths, including the skills training path under apprenticeship, to give us 18. Then in 2020, nothing happened then for several years. And then in the 2022, end of 2022 fiscal year, 30 new milestones were developed and added, and 33 new culminating tasks. And then last year, we had a number of milestones. 7 of them were adapted for the deaf-blind stream. And also the original 60 milestones and 22 adapted milestones were updated. Some of the updates were small, some were bigger. Robin again will speak to that a bit later. And the milestone guide was also updated. So those new milestones are now available on the OALCF portal, in the OALCF repository. We will also walk you through that later in terms of where they are and how to get to them if you don't have them yet. Then finally, that brings us up to date. Currently this year, some work is going on to do an overview and revision of the original 18 culminating tasks, the 6 that were developed in 2011, and the 12 new ones that were added in 2014. And it was important to get some revisions and updates done to those because they are now quite old. And the culminating task user guide is also being updated. So that's just a flow of how things have transpired over these last several years.
We'll do an interpreter switch.
Okay. Okay, I'm just pausing here for 1 second. Bear with me while I just do a quick adjustment to my screen. Sorry about that. I just had to move things around a little bit so that I could see a bit better. So just a quick recap here of where the new milestones and culminating tasks have landed in terms of first the competencies for the new milestones. There are 7 new ones for find and use information, 9 for communicate ideas and information, 6 new ones for understand and use numbers, 6 for digital technology, 1 for manage learning, 1 for engage with others. And then similarly, you can see in the right-hand side of this little table, the number of culminating tasks that were developed in each of the goal paths. And in fact, the number developed actually exceeded the target number of new milestones and culminating tasks that the ministry was originally contracting organizations to develop. So we ended up with a few more than planned, which is fine. That's all good. In terms of the culminating task development, the focus was on creating more specifically for the employment goal path and the apprenticeship path. The other goal paths were also included, but just not as many new ones were created for those. Many of the support organizations that worked on the project collaborated with service providers to help develop those new milestones and culminating tasks. Oops. And from this, I'm going to pass things over to Robin for a little bit.
Thanks, Barb. We know that many of you are probably long-time practitioners, as are Barb and I, but we feel that it's a great opportunity in case there are any newer practitioners in the webinar to just do a really brief refresher on milestones. We'll do the same thing with culminating tasks a little later in the session. So just a reminder of what the milestones are and what their purpose is. A milestone is a goal-related assessment activity, and it's something that learners complete in the program to show their ability to carry out goal-related tasks. The milestones are aligned to the 6 competencies in the OALCF framework and the 3 complexity levels found within that curriculum framework. They're meant to be standard indicators of learner progress as they move towards the completion of their goal path. So they're really meant to help practitioners answer the question, can the learner apply the skills that they're developing to purposeful or real life tasks? So this actual definition that it's showing on the slide comes out of the service provider guidelines. The guidelines have been updated over the years, but the last update took place in 2020. So this is a very current definition in terms of it is the definition we're working from right now in the guidelines. So there's a few things to remember about milestones. Probably the most important one is that learners should really only be working on milestones or completing milestones that are related to their goal or their goals for attending the program. In many cases, the milestones have applicability across a variety of goal paths. It's also really important to remember that successfully completing a milestone doesn't necessarily mean that the learner can do other tasks at the same level or task group, or that they're ready for transition. They're meant to be an indicator of learner progress, but they're definitely not intended to stand alone as an assessment tool. The results from the milestones can't be used in isolation to determine whether learners are transition ready. They're just one piece of the pie. They should complement the other assessment methods that are used to monitor learner progress within a program. So again, just to stress, milestones are associated with ongoing assessment practice in the Literacy and Basic Skills program, but they're only one component. So when we look at the milestones themselves, they are, for the most part, leveled across the 3 complexity levels within the curriculum framework. Practitioners and learners should always work together to choose milestones that represent the types of tasks learners are going to need to do once they leave the program or move on to the next step along their goal path. There are milestones for all 6 competencies across all 3 of the levels. As milestone levels increase, the complexity of the tasks the learners are asked to do also increase. What we know about complexity is that as learners perform more increasingly complex tasks, they can do things like apply background knowledge and experience to carry out unfamiliar tasks, manage tasks with unfamiliar elements. As they get more complex, they can do things like find, integrate, and analyze information, and even experiment and problem solve to achieve results. So again, it's really important that practitioners and learners work together to choose milestones that make sense, that relate to what they're going to do once they leave LBS. So we talked, or Barb mentioned earlier about the adapted milestones. So in 2014, 22 of the 60 original milestones were adapted. So an adapted version was created. The adaptations were made primarily to allow learners that had limited reading skills to show progress by completing milestones that did not actually assess reading skills specifically. So the adaptations allowed a practitioner to provide some additional supports to the learners by basically reading the instructions for the task to them. Milestones that are adapted are indicated in the milestone index and in the repository with the use of a dash A next to the milestone number in the milestone file name. We always like to point out that the adaptive milestones are there because it was a very soft launch when they did put them out. And we still find practitioners today that aren't aware of the availability of the adapted milestones and also the fact how they're adapted and what their purpose is. This table just gives you a snapshot of the milestones that have an adapted version. So as I mentioned, there are 22 milestones with an adapted version. Most of the milestones that were adopted are either level 1 or milestones that aren't leveled. The higher level milestones with an adapted version are associated with a managed learning task group. In 2022, when the new set of milestones were developed, the developers themselves were asked to try to build those adaptations into the milestones where possible to eliminate the need for a second version of a milestone. So in the newer set of milestones, you will see some of those adaptations built right into the milestone. So it's the same, there isn't a second version of it. So in 2023, 7 of the newer 2022 milestones were adapted specifically for use with the deafblind stream. And in order to delineate them or make them allow people to know which ones were adapted specifically for the deaf stream, they appear in the milestone index with a -D beside the milestone number. So I did put up here, I just kind of gave you an idea of the ones that were adapted. They are all from the new milestones. Most of them were communication milestones, but they did actually adapt across most of the competencies. So they were done or adapted by what was formerly called Deaf Literacy Initiative, and they have a new name. It's S5 Dynamic Learning Initiative. So that was a project that they undertook last year to ensure that the deafblind stream had milestones that were specific to their stream. It was a pretty exciting project, and I believe they are working on some additional milestones in the current year. So this is just a reminder for all the administrators in the room and for the practitioners that the completion of milestones are part of performance management in literacy and basic skills. They're part of the effectiveness dimension of the performance management system. The target is to have at least 60% of the learners attending the program attain at least one milestone in the fiscal year. If you aren't currently meeting this target, some of the questions you might want to ask yourself are there processes in place to ensure that learners and practitioners understand the expectation and completion of milestones? Are milestones completed and then put into CAMs in a timely fashion? So the Employment Ontario case management system, where we track all of the performance management data. Are we checking to make sure all the milestones that a learner completed are entered prior to closing a service plan in the case management system? Have the practitioners had adequate training related to the administration of milestones? And I think this is an important one because we have seen a lot of turnover in the field over the last few years. So not everybody has access to all the original training that was delivered around milestones. And of course, that's one of the reasons why we've incorporated some of it into these presentations. Do the instructors have easy yet secure access to the milestones? And are we making sure that one milestone related to the learner goal path is identified on the learner plan? So again, it's just making sure that you're using the milestones and keeping track of them. The great thing is we actually have a lot more milestones to work with now, especially with the development work that took place in 2022. It's really important to prepare learners for milestones by discussing the purpose of ongoing assessment with the learners and how it can help them reach their goals. It's also important to have learners work on activities that are related to the milestone they'll be completing. And they should always be successful at those before they ever try to complete a milestone. It's really, really important to make sure that learners are ready to complete an assessment. And it's also important to remember if a learner isn't successful, they can actually retake a milestone or redo a milestone at a later date. The recommendation is that you wait at least 6 weeks in between administering the same milestone. Again, it's just very important, as it is part of the system, to introduce the concept of milestones to learners early on in the process so they're not surprised by it.
Robin, there's a question in the chat I'll just direct you to that you, I'm sure, would be happy to respond to.
Okay, sorry. Don't adaptive milestones also address writing skill? Sorry, my thing just jumped. I'll read the question out and then I'll see if I can answer it. Don't adapted milestones also address writing skill limitations since practitioners are allowed to scribe reading milestone answers for learners? Adapted or not only for reading limitations. That is actually true, Sue. Primarily, it was to address the reading limitations, but there are some adaptations built in around the writing limitations as well. Okay. And Ashley asked, is the 6-week waiting period before retrying a milestone a recommendation or a rule? It's a recommendation. It's just a kind of a guideline to make sure that you allow enough time in between so that if a milestone is re-administered, it's not being redone based on memory. Okay. And thank you, Barb.
No problem.
Okay,
Okay, so I'll just flip to the next slide.
thank you. So this slide says how many milestones? And this is a question that comes up a lot. And there isn't really an answer to this question. There's not a set number of milestones that must be chosen. The expected amount of time a learner plans to spend in the program and the intensity of the program are really what the practitioner needs to use to determine how many milestones should be selected. Often when a learner starts out in a program, a milestone or two might be selected. Additional milestones are sometimes added as time goes on, depending on what is happening with that learner. We know that learners sometimes change their goals or modify their goals over time, and that's very common. So it's really advantageous for the learner to have milestones across the range of competencies and task groups that reflect what their needs are and their goals are. So it's, I guess, a good way to look at it is that a milestone is an opportunity to demonstrate what's been learned. And a learner always should feel confident about attempting a milestone. And I'll just speak a little bit anecdotally in terms of from a program delivery point of view, we approach the integration of milestones really in that way. We approach it and present it to the learner as an opportunity to show what they're learning. We don't talk about it in terms of it being a test or even an assessment. We really do talk about it in terms of them being able to show us that they're making progress and learning. And that's a really great way. And we find that learners actually ask to do milestones because they want to demonstrate progress and show us that they're learning things. The great thing about the addition of the 30 new milestones is it means there's going to be there is a much better variety to choose from. But what it doesn't mean is that a learner has to do more milestones just because there's more to choose from now. It was just that this initial project of development was to try to fill in some of the gaps that we knew existed with the original set of milestones. Okay. So the new milestone development, who did what? The stream and sector support organizations were asked to develop the milestones in the 2022 round of development. The ministry decided who was going to develop what according to expertise and the relevant levels. So, for example, Community Literacy of Ontario, who primarily supports community-based programs focused on level 1 milestones. HESBA, who supports school boards focused on level 2 milestones, and the College Sector Committee supporting the colleges focused on level 3 milestones. The Ontario Native Coalition was able to decide which levels were most needed in terms of adding more culturally relevant milestones to support their stream. Centre Fora and COFA, the two Francophone support organizations, were asked to develop 6 milestones each with a focus on what the Francophone stream needed the most to support programming. Those two organizations actually worked very closely together through the development process to avoid duplication. Laubac Literacy Ontario, my organization, developed guidelines and processes and training for all of those involved in development, as well as coordinating the work of all the organizations to, again, try to avoid duplication. Contact North played a supporting role through the process and did the logistical work of getting the tools desktop published and uploaded into the repository by March 30th, 2020. So, or 2022, I'm sorry, wrong date. So the milestones were available in the repository, but we weren't actually allowed to start using the milestones because they weren't available to be recorded in the against performance management in CAMS for quite some time. So overall, the new milestones were developed for each competency. So they were spread out across the entire framework. The new milestones were meant to complement or supplement the original milestones, not replace them. So we're going to take a quick look at what was developed for each of the 6 competencies. So for find and use information, there were 7 new milestones developed. 5 were developed in French and, 5 were developed in English and 2 were developed in French. All of the English milestones were translated into French, and all of the French milestones were translated into English. So this work took place primarily last year, and that was one of the reasons why they weren't available for a period of time to be actually used in programs, because we had to wait for the translation to take place. And then once that took place, everything was put into CAMs so that people could record them. So if you, just to point out on this chart, all the highlighted numbers like M201 and then M305, that just reflects the language they were developed in. When you are in the OALCF repository, all the new English versions, new English milestones are numbered from 200, and all the French versions are numbered from 300. And this allows them to be distinguished within the EOIS CAMS case management system. So if you're wondering why the numbering's like that, it's a kind of a logistical thing that had to happen so that it makes sense in that system where we report this. So under communicate ideas and information, there were 9 new milestones developed. 6 were originally developed in English and 3 in French. Many of these are more open-ended than some of the earlier milestones, and by open-ended, what I mean is that practitioners are given more of a choice within the milestone itself to be able to meet the specific needs of learners. So you can see there's just quite a variety that were developed across the different task groups. We'll move on to understand and use numbers. So there were 6 new milestones developed for the understand and use number competency, 4 in English and 2 in French. And again, they complement what was already there and fill in some of the gaps of what was missing. So use digital technology, again, 3 in English and 3 in French. Previous to 2022, we only had 3 use digital technology milestones. So this actually added quite a few to this particular competency. And I think that really reflects the fact that the use of technology has become obviously very important, especially through the last 4 or 5 years. It's always been important. It was even important when we initially rolled out the ALCF, or the Ontario Adult Literacy Curriculum Framework. But there was a fairly big focus on adding to the digital technology milestones. Managed learning, one additional milestone was developed for managed learning. It was developed in French, but has now been translated into English. And last but not least, engage with others, the same. It was developed in French and has now been translated into English as well. So at this point, all of these milestones are available on the repository, and they've all been added into the case management system. So we're now able to report on all of these milestones. Okay, so this is just a little snapshot of what happened in the last fiscal year. So last year, the ministry thought it would be a good idea, as did all of us in the field, to take a look at the original 60 milestones, plus the 22 milestones that were adopted in 2014. To take a look at them, to review them, and revise them where necessary. So prior to 2022, the milestones that were originally put in 2011 and then 2014 had never been touched. So any errors, omissions, or issues with any of them were not fixed because it wasn't funded to happen between then and 2022. So in 2022, every single milestone was reviewed. And in every single milestone, there were some minor updates made. Primarily, the updates were around replacing gender person pronouns, making everything gender neutral where possible, as long as it didn't affect the clarity. Also updating the logo and copyright in the footer. So we're from Queen's Printer to King's Printer, and also the Employment Ontario logos. And removing an unnecessary instruction that said on the next page from all of the milestones. So just improving the clarity. In some of the milestones, there were minor corrections made. And by minor corrections, we're referring to things like capitalization, spelling, spacing, things that were off that had never been fixed. So those were minor. In some of the milestones, there were major revisions, and these were primarily related to content. They were content revisions related to things like references to technology, technology references that are now outdated, updating inputs that were outdated. And that included things like web addresses that were no longer live, things like that. The other major content or revision was revising the instructions in those 22 adapted milestones to make the tasks parallel to the original milestones. So to make sure that they were exactly the same milestone because they were a little bit off. Finally, the milestone guide was also updated. So the guide and then the corresponding index was updated to include all of the milestones.
Robin, there's a question in
Yep.
the chat you might want to look at.
Okay. Could milestone 208 be used with ESL students read their first language, or must it be an Indigenous language? Okay, so I honestly, Sue, off the top of my head, I can't answer that question. I'd have to pull the milestone and take a close look at it to see what to answer that question. I don't want to give you misinformation. And I just don't have the capacity to do that during the webinar. So perhaps we can try to answer that question offline. Okay.
And we'll just switch interpreters. Thank you. We're good.
Okay, thank you. So just to recap, we started with 60 milestones in 2020 or 2014. Technically, we went to 88, or I'm sorry, 82. In 2022, we added 30 brand new milestones. And in 2023, 7 adapted milestones were added specifically for the deafblind stream. So we now have a grand total of 119 milestones to work with, which is a lot more than 60 and a lot better. So that just kind of gives you a snapshot of where we're at with milestones. Is this the end? I certainly hope not. I think that the ministry is definitely interested in making sure that we continue to look at these assessment tools and continue to make sure that we have tools that are fresh and updated and reviewed on a regular basis. So before we leave milestones, and I turn it back over to Barb to talk about culminating tasks, are there any other questions? I'm just watching the chat. Okay, so there's a question. Some milestones were adapted to be given virtually. Are there plans to make more virtually administered milestones? So Heather, the only milestones that were officially adapted to be administered virtually were those that are used by eChannel. I know that during COVID and those years where programs were delivering in a variety of different ways to try to make sure learners had service, there were some liberties taken with how milestones were probably being administered. There is a discussion going on around virtual milestones, particularly adding to the complement of milestones that eChannel is able to deliver virtually. Okay, so that's my kind of short answer to that question. Another question, what are your thoughts on reassigning milestones that have already been attained? Example, milestones that other service providers administered years ago. I'll answer with my program hat on right now, and I'll say that we don't do this. We keep we track what they've done in the past, and we select alternative milestones so that they are not redoing milestones that have been administered in the past, as long as we are able to discern which milestones have been done in the past. There is nothing, to my knowledge, from the ministry in writing about this question. Barb, do you have any comments on that?
I would just say that I think it's part of a judgment call based on how long has it been? Did they attain it or not the first time they did it? You know, has their goal or goal path changed since then? So, you know, as Robin said, there's nothing sort of official in writing about it. So I think it partly becomes a judgment call based on what is appropriate for that learner. That would be my 2 cents.
Yeah. And my only other, suggestion or thing that we do around this is we would be more inclined to use a milestone that is from the same level and task group, but perhaps a different goal path if we were wanting to do that, because they are aligned in terms of kind of what they're assessing. So I would just be cautious about it, but again, use your judgment. Okay, question. What about milestone 14 and others that are not leveled? You could theoretically change content that makes the milestone more complex. We always view that question as what serves the learner best. Okay, I'm not sure what the question is, Lisa, but absolutely. Whatever serves the learner best always makes sense.
Lisa, I think I'm guessing what you're saying is that you can change the prompt or the activity that's used in some of those milestones that aren't leveled and make them more or less complex. I think that's what you're saying. And therefore, if it might be a way to reuse the same milestone because it wouldn't necessarily have the same resource or prompt attached to it. I think. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the unleveled ones, yes, you could, if you're doing like, I think 36 is the creative one. Sure, you could have somebody do that milestone several times doing different creative things. But again, yeah, it only makes sense to do it if it does serve the learner.
Yeah.
So it's whatever's in the best interest of the learner. I also think that if you are making a reasonable practitioner informed judgment on something like that, as long as you document kind of your reasoning, I think that that's also helpful in the learner file. The rationale, that's exactly what I'm getting at. Okay. Okay, so this is a tricky question. Can we go back to the virtual question? What about the non-e-channel programs that now run a hybrid / high flex class? I have a class for on-site and online students. Can I still administer a milestone without the paper? That is to say, meet one-on-one on Zoom and have the answers in the chat feature unsaved. I am not comfortable answering that question because I think that's a ministry question. And I don't think the ministry has made any official statements about this. So I would be uncomfortable. I mean, I could tell you what we would do and as a program delivery agency, but again, I don't want to answer on behalf of what the ministry expectations are around this.
And I would agree because they haven't said anything definitive about that.
Yes, they haven't. So there's nothing to my knowledge, there's nothing in writing about this. So I guess, and again, Lisa says, I repeat, it's all about the rationale. We're always in we are in the business of serving the learners and making sure that they are able to, meet their goals. So I think that we have to always use our professional experience and knowledge to make sure that happens. And sometimes it's better not to ask a question.
I agree with that too, Robin.
Especially if you don't want to know the answer. Okay. I think that's all. So I am going to turn it over to Barb now, and we're going to move on to culminating tasks.
Great. Thank you, Robin. Thanks also everyone for all the great questions that you've put in the chat so far today. It's wonderful when we can talk about some of those, even if we maybe can't answer all of them directly. Yeah, lots of hats coming on and off. That's correct, Lisa, because we wear more than one. That's right. So we're just going to do similarly to what Robin did with the milestones, is just do a few slides of a walkthrough about sort of the purpose and nature of the culminating tasks in terms of what the ministry's expectations are. And so once again, if you had attended one of our previous webinars on this topic, you might have this information a little fresher in your mind. So a culminating task is more complex than a milestone because it's more of an integrated activity that takes into account or uses more than one competency and more than one task group at the same time. And it's longer. And in a perfect world, a culminating task reflects some kind of authentic task that the learner would do when they leave the LBS program and move into their goal destination. So for example, if they're on the employment goal path, then, they would ostensibly do a culminating task for employment that reflects or connects to something that they might have to do on the job. And it, to sum that up, it answers the questions. It helps to answer, oops, sorry, I went further. Helps to answer the question, can the learner manage the expectations of the learning, training, community, or work setting after leaving the LBS program? This question is a little bit, I think, too loaded because a culminating task isn't the be all and end all of determining whether the learner can manage the expectations of the next step. So it's one indicator that they may be able to manage the expectations of their community training work setting after they leave us in LBS. Just to digress for one moment, Stacy has now placed the correct evaluation link in the chat. So if you do have to leave early, please try and at least, click on the link and do the evaluation, or you can do it at the end and Stacy will pop it into the chat once or twice more. So back to the slide. So this is a quote right from the LBS Service Provider Guidelines. And so just to review, a culminating task is more complex than a milestone. As I said a moment ago, it incorporates more than one or multiple competencies and task groups. And in some form, it's an application of the skills and knowledge across more than one competency. So a culminating task might include find and use information. It might also include understand and use numbers. It might also include manage learning. So it's a collection of a number of competencies and task groups that are collected and made into a task or set of short tasks to reflect the goal path for which it's been created.
And the interpreters are going to switch.
Okay. Another really important distinction between milestones and culminating tasks is the last bullet. And culminating tasks are meant to represent the end of the learner's time with us. So whereas milestones are to be administered, at intervals that make sense for that learner throughout their program and throughout their time with us, a culminating task, as they are currently situated and as they currently exist, are meant to represent the end point of a goal path when a learner is ready to leave our program and move into their next step. But having said that, we know that not all learners will reach the point of being able to do a culminating task. Many learners do complete and get to that point, but many do not. And that's okay, because there's lots of other good indicators of progress and assessment and evaluation besides getting all the way through their learning plan and ending up doing a culminating task. I'm just going to go to the chat here, see a couple things popped up. Can 2 goal paths be done at the same time? Deb, you have to select one goal path when the student registers, because that's part of what goes into the CAMS system. So you could work on activities with them for more than one goal path, but you have to select one that's attached to their learner plan and that you put in CAMS. Susan says, what's the expectation as for when the CTs will be used by the ministry in program evaluation, or are they currently? And I missed the memo. No, you didn't miss the memo. The way back in 2011-12 until 2013-14, the culminating tasks were counted, for lack of a better term, in our performance measures as part of as performance indicators as part of the completion measure. And then in 2013-14, the ministry decided to remove the completion measure as something that counts in our performance measures and our service quality standard each month. But they have continued through that time to collect the data in terms of how many students are completing a milestone or a culminating task, yes, no, or not, or no response are the options in CAMS. So, I think it's safe to assume, and Robin and I certainly have talked about this at different times, that because the ministry has invested quite a bit of time and money in producing or helping funding to produce 33 new culminating tasks, if you look at the writing on the wall, it might be safe to assume that at some point in the future, culminating tasks may start to be counted again as part of our completion measure. Nothing official on that. It's just, inferring from the fact that the ministry has done a whole new investment in culminating tasks that they might, in fact, start to count again at some point in the future. So, Simone, the culminating tasks are recorded in CAMS because when you close a file, you have to answer the question, has the learner successfully completed a culminating task? There are 3 possible answers to that you can choose from in CAMS: yes, no, or no response. And whatever you record for that does come out on your monthly detailed service quality report that you or your program manager would be looking at. So it's recorded, but right now it's not part of what we're measured on as service providers in LBS. So technically it doesn't count right now, but it is recorded. Okay, just going to pause there for one moment in case anybody types anything else into the chat. Okay, all right, let's go on then. Another really important point always to remember is that a culminating task is very centric to LBS. A learner can't take a culminating task anywhere and have it count for something. It doesn't replace any kind of credential or course or certification or anything like that that a learner might need to, for example, get a job or to go on to post-secondary or to get an apprenticeship. Culminating tasks are just, they only exist within LBS. And thanks, Stacy's also posted in the chat the link again to where the pop-up PD resources are located. And to the another link to the evaluation survey. The culminating tasks are one element of indicating that a learner is ready to transition or may be ready to transition into their goal destination after they leave us. But it's also important when we talk about culminating tasks to remember that we're using a whole variety of assessment tools in LBS, including milestones. Milestones and culminating tasks happen to be the ones that the ministry is interested in as a more standard approach, but as good practice and as good adult educators, we're using all kinds of different evaluation and assessment tools along the way and while our learners are with us. So there are many other things that will help us to know if a learner is ready to transition from our program into their goal destination. Have they completed any credentials or courses required for their next step, whether it's for employment? Maybe they need to do WMIS, maybe they need to do SmartServe. If they're looking at a post-secondary program, do they have the courses that are admission requirements? Do they have a fairly stable life situation? Because if they don't, then that will affect their ability to transition successfully. And of course, their own motivation and persistence and an ability to be self-directed as they move out of LBS and into their next step. So that little summary of bullet points actually comes from the original Culminating Task User Guide. And the point just being that culminating tasks are just one small measure or indicator of whether somebody might be ready to transition out of LBS and into their next step. And then finally, to put the first slide about culminating tasks into a slightly different context, culminating tasks ideally help the learner to answer this question. Do I have a reasonable chance of managing the next steps in my life, learning, work? And can I transition successfully to my goal destination? But again, it's just one indicator. We can't put too much emphasis on the culminating task as an indicator for someone to transition, because it's just one of many indicators. So Simone has said, is a CTE required to do or not required to do for learners? Well, it says in our agreements that, we will administer them in our contracts with the ministry. But in the culminating task user guide, I think it's on page 4 or 6, it also states that the decision to do a culminating task or not is negotiated between the learner and the practitioner. Because there are many cases where it isn't necessarily appropriate for someone to do a culminating task. Either they haven't finished, right the way through to the end of their goal path, or it may be that their specific goal destination doesn't lend itself to doing a culminating task. That's partly why the no response answer is included in CAMS. So a few minutes ago, I mentioned that when you're putting your culminating task, when you're answering that question, when you exit the learner from CAMS, has the learner successfully completed a culminating task? You have a choice of yes, no, or no response. So no response is often the most applicable choice if it isn't appropriate for that learner to do a culminating task. And I know a couple of, Linda asked, can you give an example of a culminating task and how it fits into transitioning? Linda, if you hold that thought just for a minute, in the next slide or two, we'll be able to actually see the titles of some of the culminating tasks, and that'll help to answer your question. And then just up here a bit in the chat. Yeah, Lisa mentions that it's better with all of the many new CTs for employment. Yeah, there's many more now to choose from. Rob, did I miss anything in the chat?
Sorry, I just turned off my mic because I was coughing.
That's okay.
No, other than just Lisa's comment, and then another comment, it's better with the new
Right.
group of culminating tasks. Yep. That's all.
Right.
You didn't miss anything else.
Okay, great. So just to recap, kind of on the continuum of the learners programming with us, they have daily activities, lessons, different things that they're doing to increase their skills. They have some activities that might be task-based that are more, more authentic tasks that they might be needing to do related to their goal. They might have integrated tasks, which again are just broader applications of their skills. They can do milestones to demonstrate their progress as they move along. And then if they do get to the end of their learner plan and they are ready to transition to their next step in their goal destination, then potentially they could do a culminating task. That's a very high level overview. And in some cases, as learners work through these different types of activities, they may end up at the end of their program with some kind of a credential or certification or something that relates to their goal destination. Or they may not. It really just depends on where they're heading and what it is they're doing with us and why they're with us. And all these different pieces are outlined on their learner plan, mostly as learning activities and milestones, and then a culminating task at the end if they do one. We're doing pretty well for time. Again, just another way of looking at the relationship between milestones and culminating tasks in a graphic form. Learners are doing milestones as they work through the program. They might do 1, 2, 3, 10, depending on how long they're with us and what they need to do. They may do a culminating task at the end before they transition out of our program and into their, hopefully into their goal destination, whether it's employment, apprenticeship, post-secondary, greater independence, secondary school credit. And then just to reiterate one more time, milestones are delivered or administered during the learner's journey with us, and culminating tasks are meant to be, a culminating task is meant to be administered at the end when they're ready to leave, if it makes sense for them to do a culminating task. So here we go. Who did what? Same as we told you in the culminating tasks. The regional literacy networks, and you will recognize the name probably of your regional literacy network here. They were funded to develop 2 culminating tasks for employment, apprenticeship, or skills training. The reason that the regional networks were funded to do the development of culminating tasks around employment, apprenticeship, and skills training is because they would have the pulse or the knowledge of what are some in-demand jobs, what are some areas in their region that that are where there are many employers. Like, for example, is it a manufacturing area? Is it an area where there's a lot of health services? So the regional networks were invited to kind of help address those labor market needs in their development of the culminating tasks for apprenticeship, employment, and skills training. And 15 of the 16 LBS networks did participate in that development. It wasn't mandatory, but most of them, 15 of the 16, did accept the funding and create 2 culminating tasks, as noted here. And then Simcoe Muskoka developed 1 culminating task, and that was also in employment and or apprenticeship skills training. And then also similar to the milestones, the sectoral provincial support organizations were invited to do some development as well. So the CSC, my organization, received funding to develop a culminating task for the post-secondary goal path. Community Literacy of Ontario developed a new one for the independence goal path. Down here, Continuing Education School Board Administrators, KESBA, developed a new one for the secondary school credit path. Again, Contact North participated in, or is participating this year in getting those culminating tasks into the repository and uploaded, and working with LLO, who is also similar to the milestones, helping to oversee the process of getting the culminating tasks updated and available in the portal. So that work is going on right now.
And we'll switch interpreters, please.
So here, and this is going back to a question in the chat earlier, I think from Linda. What you'll start to see now on the screen is some of the titles of the new culminating tasks. So, for example, under apprenticeship, we have several new ones here: construction craft worker, early childhood educator, carpenter, preparing for the certificate of qualification exam, which is the exam that's required if someone is an apprentice in a trade that is considered compulsory, a trade where you have to be licensed. And then also heavy equipment technician. So Linda, to try to answer your question here, if you had a learner who, for example, wanted to pursue a carpentry apprenticeship, then this culminating task would likely be suitable for them when they get to the end of their time with you, if it makes sense for them to do a culminating task. And because their goal is to enter carpentry or a related field. There isn't a culminating task, of course, for every profession or line of work, but there's more of them now to enable us to select culminating tasks that better fit with the learner's goals, because there are many more of them now, especially in apprenticeship and employment. The original culminating tasks under apprenticeship are also listed here, and I'll talk a little bit later about how and which ones have been updated of the old ones. Under the skills training subgroup of apprenticeship, there are 4 new culminating tasks that you can see here. One nice thing about the new ones in apprenticeship and employment is that they are more occupationally specific. Originally, when there were so few culminating tasks, they really had to be broad, because they needed to try and address employment in general or transitioning to apprenticeship in general. But now we have a number that are more occupation specific and therefore more meaningful to use for many learners. So there are 21 new employment path culminating tasks. And really, it's not a surprise that the ministry put most of the money into the employment culminating tasks, because, you know, getting people employed is a very strong mandate of the current government. Apprenticeship is as well. So it also stands to reason that most of the, or a fair chunk of the funding that was devoted to the new culminating tasks was in apprenticeship and then employment as well. So quite a nice variation here of culminating tasks related to these many different professions. And I do want to point out that this one, used digital technology to search for jobs, has also been adapted for the deaf stream. And it's possible in the future that the deaf stream may adapt more of them. But for now, that one has been adapted and will be released with the rest of the new ones. Oops, just leave that up there for one more minute. Oops, wrong way. There we go. The old original employment culminating tasks were under these 3 categories. One that related to fire safety, one that related to job readiness, and one that was food service oriented. So again, to go back to my previous point, the original culminating tasks were very broad. There wasn't enough of them to target specific industries or sectors or jobs. For the independent school path, these were the 3 originals. And then a new one for the independent school path on information on a medicine product label. One new one added for the secondary school credit path. Simone says use new now and not use old. Oh, you can use any of them, Simone, old or new. And it will just be a matter of looking at them and deciding which ones might be most useful for your learner when they get to that point. I will say that the old ones that are currently posted on the repository are in their original format. The old ones are currently being reviewed and revised, but the ones that appear, the old ones that are on the repository are the originals. Sometime, I hope later this year, the newly refreshed old ones will be available. The revised milestones are all there, Julie. They're on the OALCF portal. And Robin's going to walk us through the OALCF repository in just a minute so you can see where they are. And Lisa's comment, it's still really tough to get a CT for low-level learners and modular program learner. It's handy we can opt out of them. Yeah, I agree, Lisa. But should we still be using the old ones still, you can use whichever ones you want, Julie. You can use the old ones and the new milestones, some of each. You can use all new ones. It's a matter of which milestones are best going to serve what your learners are doing in terms of which ones you choose. Okay, and we'll just carry on here to the last couple of slides about the new culminating tasks. So the new culminating task for the post-secondary goal path is related to post-secondary admission requirements. And then these were the 3 originals. So as Robin did with the milestones, I'm now just going to finish off by telling you a little bit about what was changed in, or what is being changed in those original 18 milestones. So all of those original CTs, just like all the original milestones, were reviewed and are undergoing some revisions. Some of these are the same types of revisions that have been done already to the milestones in terms of gender neutral language where it's appropriate. Because the culminating tasks often include a scenario, about a person or a situation, some of the names have been changed to make, to address more equity and diversity. And again, the logo and the copyright have been changed in the footer. In some of the culminating tasks, they were either shortened or condensed because some were really, really long. And they've now, a number of those have been shortened. And if they were shortened, the suggested timeline has probably also been shortened. One important update in several of them, again, similar to what happened in the milestones, is replacing or changing some outdated sources or dollar values, things like that just don't make sense in 2023. So those things have been updated. And of course, just a general overview for spelling and grammar and checking for consistency in bulleted lists and so on. And then I would say, I think 3 of the CTs of the originals have been completely redone because they just did not have current information in them at all anymore. One example was the apprenticeship employment culminating task. Well, apprenticeship has changed a whole lot since these were originally developed. And so now there's an updated apprenticeship employment culminating task that reflects the current state of apprenticeship in Ontario. This should actually say 2 were updated in apprenticeship completely and 1 in post-secondary. The training options one in the apprenticeship goal path has also been updated similarly because the training options in apprenticeship are now different. And in post-secondary, the child development focused culminating task has been completely redone as well. So revisions in some and complete overhauls in 3 of the 18 originals. Just quickly go back to the chat here too. Susan says, a perennial frustration for me. Oops, I keep losing it. My cursor is not quite there. Susan, a perennial frustration for me is that by virtue of being task-based, milestones require context-specific vocabulary and background knowledge, which are often lacking in our LBS learners. That's true. I think, for example, of competitive rates by the item in milestone 1 and terrestrial in milestone 4. Does this ever come up in milestone revision discussions? Robin, I'll send that one back to you because you've been more intimately involved in the milestone side.
So, I mean, you make the point that the reason that they're like this is because they're task-based in the question. So, they weren't necessarily reviewed for things like that in that round of review. I've made a note of it. I can take it back to the ministry. And it can be it's something that maybe can be included in suggestions for the future. That's the answer I have. But yeah, absolutely. But again, we're working with task-based milestones that do have context-specific vocabulary sometimes by fact that they are task-based. So
Yeah, it's a good point, Susan. And I think that
yep.
you're not the only one that is frustrated by that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully with the influx of new milestones, you know, there are a wider variety to choose from across the different task groups and complexity levels. So if there's something that doesn't make sense because of that, there is hopefully another option at this point. But again, I've made a note of it. I'm actually copy pasting some of the chat into a document that we're keeping. Just feedback when we're out and doing these types of things with practitioners. Okay. And then Heather did make a comment. I'll just do this while I'm in here, Barb.
Yep.
Likewise, apprenticeship tasks in the task-based activities portal have also been updated. More to come. So yeah, don't forget about the task-based activities portal. So that's a place where, I mean, that's been there for quite a while. There's an enormous amount of development in there, and that's the place to go, a place to go for to access task-based activities that have been developed and vetted for complexity, so that you have those materials to work with learners in program on a daily basis.
Okay, in the interest of time, Robin, I'm going to swap out with you again here and let you wrap up with the OLCF repository.
And the interpreters will switch as well.
Okay. So we are going to just walk through the repository for people to make sure that they know where to access the tools, how to access the tools, and just give you a bit of an overview of the portal itself. So all milestones and culminating tasks are housed online in the repository. This site is hosted and maintained by Contact North. If you don't have access, you can request it by contacting Sarah Govro at Contact North. There's also a button on the first page where you can request access. So one thing that's really important is that and this is from the ministry. It's to ensure that the milestones, this should actually say the milestones and the culminating tasks. I miss putting that on this slide, but to ensure the tools retain their integrity as assessment tools and remain as secure and confidential as possible, milestone documents and culminating task documents should be accessed directly from the repository. So this has come up quite a lot in the last few weeks in terms of the fact that all of the milestones have had some form of revision, whether it be minor or major. And the idea is that people would be accessing these tools. They would have permission to access and would access these tools directly. And we know that a lot of programs over time have printed out all the tools and have worked out their own ways of doing things. So I can only tell you that the idea is that they are accessed directly. This may become increasingly important as time goes on, because, and I will tell you a bit about this, but we've built in a mechanism now into the repository to make sure when an error or an issue is identified with one of the tools, we can fix it in real time. So we don't have to wait 10 years again to fix things. So accessing the most current version is always going to be the best thing to do. And the most current version is always going to be on the portal itself. Okay, go ahead, next slide, please. So this is just shows you the once you've opened the portal, this is what it looks like, in case you haven't been in there or seen it. Everything is accessed off of one page. You just scroll down the page to find what you need. The site is set up so you can toggle between French and English, and there's a link at the top of the page and the bottom of the page to be able to switch between languages. So currently, everything that is there that you can see and access, you can use. So there's been a few questions. Can we use old? Can we use new? Everything, all the old or original or originally revised tools are there, as are all the new tools. So if anything is appearing on the page at this point, you are free to use it. The guides, the guide is also updated for milestones. It will be updated in the future for culminating tasks. So just be aware, if you're looking for the index of milestones, so the full list of 119 milestones, that document is there if you want to print that document off. But again, as we make changes or add things, that document might also change. Slide. So when you scroll down, the first thing that shows up is the list of milestones. They're organized by competency. And you just have to actually click on the competency that you're looking for to open up the full list that's available. So we'll just go to the next slide. So this is the list of milestones that you can access currently for competency A. Find and use information. So if you look through this, I'll just point out a few things on this list. For example, milestone 1 also has an adapted version. So there's a milestone 1 and then there's a milestone 1A. If you look down to milestone 202, there's a 202 and then there's a 202D. So that's an adapted version, the D version for the deafblind stream. So essentially, everything that's here is the most current updated versions. You will notice the original milestones have been redated with December 2022 when they were revised. Any of the new 30 milestones, the 200 and 300 series milestones, are dated March 2022, and then you will see the ones that were adapted for the deaf-blind stream are March 2023 milestones. Okay, and next slide. If you scroll down further, you get to the culminating tasks section. Again, same thing. Right now, the culminating task user guide, it will be updated once the revisions on the original 18 are finished and uploaded. But essentially, you have them organized by your 5 goal paths. And if you, next slide, you just click on a goal path. I've just given you the example from the apprenticeship goal path. So for each culminating task, you have 2 documents. You have the learner version and you have the practitioner version. Lynn, okay, sorry, just there's some questions going on in the, okay, and you're answering them, Barb. Sorry, I just see some chatter going on in the chat box.
Yeah, it's just about accessing the repository.
Okay, so the question was, can non-SPRAs have access? So a SPRA is a service. I can't remember what that acronym means, honestly. It's like service provider something. Have access to the repository? And the answer is yes, they can, but the SPRA has to verify that that practitioner can have access. Okay. So next slide. Going forward, what I mentioned this a minute ago, but going forward, milestones and culminating tasks are going to be fixed or revised on an ongoing basis. So if you are working with one of the tools and you discover a mistake, an error, an issue, or an omission, please report it to us immediately. So we've put a form on the repository you can click on the form and you can just fill it out, give us as much detail as possible. So that's essentially a new development, and it will be great going forward because it allows us to keep things up to date without having to go through like a whole major revision process. Okay. So
Why don't you just go ahead and address this, because I do need to jump off in a moment anyway, and then I'll let you wrap up, because folks, thank you so much. I do have to jump off to facilitate another meeting, so I'm going to just let Robin do the wrap up here today.
Okay. So just a note about assessment for learners accessing multiple LBS sites. So when learners attend more than one in-person LBS service delivery site, or when learners utilize a blended learning approach by complementing in-person programming with LBS e-channel delivery, or where they're co-registered with 2 LBS service providers, when more than one service delivery site contributes to a learner successfully completing an assessment, it's acceptable for one service provider to conduct the assessment with the learner and for both service delivery sites to document the achievement in the reporting to the ministry. And we just wanted to point that out during this. This was a new thing that we added to this, but we just wanted people to be aware of this. Which is, it's just an important point that's kind of gotten lost, I think, over the years in the discussion. So it's very important to remember that. So learners can access more than one LBS site at the same time. Learners can be in an in-person site, and they can also be accessing e-channel at the same time. And you can share the results of the assessments. Okay, and
I realized I didn't leave Robin because I've got the presentation here.
And the interpreter is going to switch because the current interpreter has to leave as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carolyn. Ashley has a question. When a milestone is revised, will the file name also change with an updated month year? Would be helpful in highlighting that there's a change to look for. Not sure if we know the answer to that yet, because we've not undertaken any of the revisions yet. Robin, do you want to jump in on that?
I don't have an answer to that. If it's a minor revision, likely not. With the expectation is that when you are going to administer a milestone, you're accessing the most current version off the site, which should eliminate those problems. If it's a major revision, then it will be a discussion with the ministry how that will be addressed.
All right, everyone, thank you for staying along a few minutes late today. It's 3:40 now. Sarah, if you're interested in, I'm just going to put eChannel at contactnorth.ca is the best way to get access to the repository. You can email Sarah directly, but the eChannel one that Stacy just put in is it ensures that your message will get seen. And thank you to the interpreters today. Thank you to Stacy from Contact North. Of course, thank you to my friend and co-presenter and colleague, Robin Cook-Ritchie. Always great to present with you, Robin. And
You as well.
I think that we're going to stop the recording now. And I am needing to jump into another meeting. So goodbye, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.